Hey, everybody. Welcome to Daniel Davis Deep Dive, live from Washington, D.C. We have as our guest today a fan favorite of the show, Scott Horton, director of the Libertarian Institute and host of the Scott Horton podcast, and just all around great guy. Welcome back to the show, Scott.
Happy to be here with you, Danny. Thank you.
So we have a lot of things to discuss today, and it seems like a lot of this is just kind of a broken record and just some strange stuff coming out of the White House, quite frankly, about subjects that are really important. We could talk a lot about what's going on in Israel, Hamas, and God knows there's plenty of things to talk about there. But we're going to talk about at least the ongoing war, the one that was in first place, I guess, for a while with the Russia-Ukraine war, and how we're trying to sort out American interest out of all of this mess that's descending and disintegrating around Ukraine's ear, and how this war is just not going. Nothing has ever gone since the original Ukrainian offensive in late 2022, where they actually had a couple of legit tactical successes in Kherson and Kharkiv provinces. Since that time, in November of 2022, it's been downhill since, and it's continuing to do that way. They launched a much ballyhooed offensive in June of this year that they said was going to cut the Russian forces in half and go down to the Azov coast and set the stage for a good 2024, to where they would drive Russia out of all of Ukraine. That was the hope that was listed in there. And you had stalwarts like David Petraeus and Ben Hodges telling, yeah, man, they're going to Ukraine, not just the Azov coast. They're going to go to Ukraine. And they went nowhere for very practical reasons, which many of us have been arguing for months before that it was a suicide mission, basically, and it turned out that way. Unfortunately, it doesn't appear that our leaders are willing to acknowledge reality, and we're going to continue to press on in other directions. So there's a big issue right now, and has been for a while now, in the U.S. Senate especially, but also in the House, of not providing funds for Ukraine. Joe Biden asked for $60 billion. He wanted it back at the end of the fiscal year in September, didn't get that. And it's still not done right now. Who knows whether it's going to get done. But Secretary of State Blinken made an appeal yesterday to try to get that logjam broke. And here's some of his logic.
Other than the supplemental request that the president has made of Congress, there is no magic pot of money that we can draw from. The assistance, the support that we have designated for Ukraine, that is running out. It's running down. We are nearly out of money.
Yeah, and so what he's trying to say there is that, there's no magic pot of money, which he's right, because there's not, but we need congressional people to pass a budget, which is also magic money, because it's just borrowed. It doesn't exist either. So one way or the other, it's not going to be real money. It's just going to get us further into debt. But then he said why he thinks we should do that, because of the investment we've already made.
We have made a real investment in Ukraine's future, in its freedom, and it makes no sense to me that we would now renege on that investment, having already done so much, and having already put Ukraine in a position where it can not only survive, but actually thrive going forward.
Okay, Scott, I just got to say this. The first clip there, he said there's no pot of magic money. So instead, he's making these magic claims that we have provided the ability for Ukraine not just to survive, but to thrive going into the future. And I don't know, man, I'm just not seeing it.
I hate to turn this around on you and start with a question, Colonel, but could you talk to me a little bit about what is known about the actual Ukrainian troop strength? I mean, we hear anecdotes about 50-year-olds being conscripted and women being sent to the front lines and things. I don't really know, but do you know they have this many brigades, this many divisions left? You would consider their army to be completely broken and useless at what certain point, something like that? Can you talk to me about that?
There is pretty good reporting that there are somewhere around 400,000 active fighters throughout the whole army. So that's everywhere in the northern part, in the western part, even on duty there, and then of course on the front lines there. And as a point, they actually started out with somewhere around 700,000 by the summer of 2022. And by some estimates, they actually had 1 million. So what does that tell you? That they've lost somewhere around 500,000 to possibly even more.
But then At the same time, though, it sounds like what you're saying, though, is possibly as long as the West is willing to continue throwing money at it, that they have enough of an army to keep fighting for not to win, but to keep fighting.
Yeah, and they had, in fact, to support that, the Ukrainian side has just announced an additional full mobilization of the population, and they've expanded it down. They were at 27 years old, now they're expanded down to 25, and by some estimates, even more are being unofficially press ganged in. And of course, the number on the top side, as you've mentioned, there has been some reports of actual 70-year-old people being captured by the Russians. And the New York Times actually had a piece, I think it was just yesterday, where some of those guys are just saying, we're just worn out. So what's left is not very good. But yeah, to your point, that does appear what we're practically doing, whatever we're saying out loud.
So let me make a poor analogy for you then to the war in Afghanistan, where the United States says, look, and in fact, as long as the US was willing to back the ANA, it could stand. As soon as America would not back them anymore and was not willing to send the troops that it would take to really reinforce them, at that point, they just completely dried up. But so I guess, it's sort of a two-parter for you then again is, how close is that analogy here where in fact, as long as America and NATO, assuming Congress goes along, or they just take the money from, something else, because they do have all different slush funds in the Pentagon. God knows what they can spend to keep the thing going. Are you saying then that America could keep them going conceivably at essentially the same rate they're dying now for another year or so? Or more, but then also at the same time, just like in the case of the Ghani government there, that once America leaves, their army will fall apart, their government might fall?
Well, there's certainly a lot more. That's definitely not a bad analogy, unfortunately.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning into this episode of the Scott Horton Show. I'm interviewing Daniel Davis, the great heroic whistleblower of the Afghan war. Go ahead, Danny.
Yeah, we actually had on our show last week, I think it was, there was a clip that we pulled from June, I believe it was June of 2021, where Ashraf Ghani went to the White House and sat there with the smiling Joe Biden, who said, we are in this for the long term for you. We are going to, we're withdrawing our troops here, but our support is ironclad and steadfast, and we're going to continue going on. And a couple of months later, the whole thing collapsed. And so there's unfortunately some other similarities, especially since Zelensky just came into town and he said kind of the same kind of thing. So there are some uncomfortable parallels that seem to be coming out there.
Yeah. Well, and it seems so meaningful that the Washington Post did that big two-parter where they said essentially, yep, Davis was right all along, that it might take X amount of time or X plus another few months or another year, but essentially manpower and time and equipment and economy are on Russia's side. And they have no Taiwan Strait of a moat here whatsoever. The Russians can continue to just roll in and roll in and roll in until they're done winning by their terms. So it's hard to believe it's been 2 years. And I think we find ourselves very lucky that the war has not escalated too much, outside of Ukraine's border. They've done strikes inside Russia and terrorist attacks and sabotage inside Russia, but luckily it hasn't really spread to any neighboring states or anything like that, or to general war with the United States. But it seems, someone pointed out on Twitter this morning that they took down the banner link at the Washington Post. War.
Right. Yeah, I saw that.
No, somebody at CIA
They're moving on
hands of this thing or something, which is horrible in a way. I mean, you look at the level of betrayal here. It's the Shiite uprising of 91 times a billion, right? What they've done to these people, putting them in this situation, refusing to negotiate in good faith, and eventually, sooner or later, leaving them high and dry when they're destined to lose anyway. And as we've talked about before on the show, they didn't even have to lose the Donbass. Now they've lost 4 provinces. And Danny, I was just talking with Kit Clarenberg, and I'm not sure about his interpretation of this, but he was saying that when Putin says, hey, when we say denazification, we also say decommunization. And by that, we mean any territory that Lenin gave to Ukraine, we're taking back, which would include Kharkiv and Odessa.
Yeah, I
And
keep
so
hearing those
I don't
names
know.
pop up.
I'm sorry?
I say I keep hearing those names pop up in lots of speculation about what could be next, especially if there's no deal done. But unfortunately, the degradation in our position is even worse, and I'm afraid you're going to find some more parallels to Afghanistan in this next clip and that same press conference by Secretary of State when he said, "Look, we're going to help them stand on their own 2 feet."
We have a very clear plan, as I said, to make sure that Ukraine can stand on its own 2 feet, militarily, economically, democratically, so that these levels of support and assistance will no longer be necessary. But we have to help Ukraine get through the next period of time, get through this winter, get through the spring and summer.
Okay, let's translate that into English. They're not saying we need to give this money now to help them get through the spring and summer, even though those are the words he said. The standard that he said at the first part of that, to help them stand on their own 2 feet, that's a decades-long process that it would take there. So it's foolish for anybody to think that actually we're looking for a 60 billion and then we're done. No, if we actually follow through on the strategy behind what he said, you're talking a perpetual into the future continual money, because they'll come back for another billions, another big package after that. Otherwise, they'll again say the same thing that, well, we can't stop it now because of the investment we've made. That argument will never change, but the battlefield will continue to get worse, I believe.
Yeah, what a catastrophe. And now I know that overall in the war, the Russian strategy has been essentially, well, since 22 at least, to dig in and fight a defensive war against the impending surge or the impending offensive. It was the winter offensive that never happened and then was put off through the spring. And then, as you said, when they launched in the summer, they got virtually nowhere, as you and all the other experts predicted would happen. But I have read a few reports about fighting, in various places up and down the line of contact there where the Russians are actually moving forward. But I wonder if you know much more about that. I'm much better on the politics and not nearly as good on the actual battlefield conditions and the lines and those kinds of things as you are.
Yeah, and let me just point out that the things you're talking about are very true. This, especially on the entire eastern front, from the north all the way to the south, the Russians are making inching progress forward. Ukraine is on its heels everywhere. There is no place that they're moving forward. There's one place in Avdiivka where they do seem to again have blunted the Russian move forward there, and certainly that's good on them for there. They've been really stalwart from the beginning. They've been remarkable in how good they've been in that area, but that's the only one where they're holding fast. The rest of them, they're continuing to give ground while Russia's building up. Now, you probably saw a couple of days ago that Putin had a big 4-hour-long marathon kind of press conference where he took open questions, and he was very, very confident. And there's a reason why he's confident. And note the things that he's saying right now, but in the clip we're about to show here, because in March and April of 2022, there was a deal on the table that could have ended the war where it was. Kiev would still have maintained even nominal control over the Donbass. They could have had some control over that area as well. They wouldn't have lost Mariupol. They wouldn't have lost several Donetsk, all these other cities. Bakhmut would still be an actual city today with people in it. All those things would have been the case. They said no. They rejected the deal that was offered at the table at the time. And now then, here's what Putin's saying he's looking to do now.
Сегодня Украина почти ничего уже не производит. Пытаются что-то там еще сохранить. Но почти ничего не происходит. Все привозят, извините за моветон, на халяву все привозят. Но эта халява когда-то может и закончиться. И, судя по всему, так и заканчивается.
So he's talking about the fact that the support in the U.S. for money is clearly waning, and it's not going to continue on like Blinken wants to do. It's also happening the same way in Europe. Lots of people are dialing back in there. Everybody's already given all the money that they have, all the weapons that they have to spare. So there's no more coming. And as a result of that, here's what Putin says that he's willing to do.
Мы достигнем своих целей, о которых вы сказали. Теперь вернемся к этим целям. Они не меняются. Вот я напомню, о чем мы тогда говорили. О денацификации Украины, о демилитаризации, о ее нейтральном статусе. Теперь, что касается демилитаризации. Ну, не хотят договариваться. Ну что ж, мы тогда вынуждены принимать другие, в том числе военные меры.
So the deal that was on the table in April is no longer on the table. Now then he's saying, basically, either you make a deal now that gives us the things that we want, or I think to your point there, I think that the code words are we're going to continue on into Kharkiv, into Odessa, and the fact is that the Russians appear on a path intellectually and mindset that even if it takes another year, if they only make this meters wide progress, they're going to continue on until he gets what he believes is a regime that is demilitarized, meaning defeated. And his one of his foreign affairs officials previously specified that the only thing we're going to talk about now is submission. So we're not talking about what we're going to give away. We're only if we're going to talk about your surrender, basically, is where they're at. The reason they're making that statement is because he sees what we're talking about, what you've been talking about, that there's no military path for Ukraine even to hold on, much less to win. But there is a path for Russia to win, and I think he knows it.
Yeah. Well, in fact, I forgot the exact terms, but certainly in August of 22, the Russians were still talking about, minimalist demands. It essentially dropped all the talk about denazification, which is like what they're going to abolish all right-wing nationalism in the country or something. They talked about neutrality and demilitarization, and I forgot the specifics, but essentially it was still a pretty generous offer considering how far they had already gotten by then. And then it was 2 or 3 weeks later was when the Ukrainians got their big success in Kharkiv and in Kherson, the weekend of September 11th, 22. And then came the angry Russian response to that, which was, okay, all the previous deals are off the table. Now we're officially annexing, even if we don't control yet, we're officially annexing all of Zaporozhye and all of Kherson. And you're lucky if we stop there, kind of thing. Yeah. So not just the scotched peace deal of March and April, but they were still essentially willing to negotiate on reasonable terms in August of 22. And it was the Ukrainian big offensive, their one last big offensive success then. And, it's funny because we always bring up how Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, had recommended then, hey, you boys ought to negotiate now while you're only this far behind and not worse. This is your best position of strength you're going to have. And then, of course, the narrative always in the true story, I guess, is that Blinken and Sullivan overruled that and said, no, we're going to do this great offensive and all these kinds of things. But it does raise the question of whether the Russians would have come to the table then, or if they were just going to angrily say, no way, we're not stopping until we're taking all 4 of these provinces. It's more the point that Milley was just saying, this is the best you're ever going to do, not that it was a guarantee that the Russians were then going to accept whatever, the Ukrainian position of strength there, because it still wasn't exactly that. It was just as strong as it was ever going to be. As I always say, only this far behind, not quit while you're ahead, quit while you're only this far behind.
This far behind, yeah.
Instead of worse, right?
Right.
And so, and then also, we always talk about the war because it's the war, but don't anybody ever forget that in December and January and February of 2021 and into 22, that the Russians offered 2 treaties, and they were not just a bunch of hype. I had talked to all different experts, including Chas Freeman, who had gone to China with Nixon and had been the ambassador to Saudi and was going to be the chair of the National Intelligence Council, except the Israel lobby got him. But he was, that level of a stature of a guy. And he told me then before the war that, no, of course you don't just sign on the dotted line. But is this proposed treaty a reasonable basis for negotiation? Exactly. Absolutely, it is. Absolutely, we should be negotiating in good faith over this treaty. And they refused to do that. Plan A was to tell Putin, you better not. Plan B was we're going to fund the insurgency like Afghanistan, which brings me back around to questioning you some more again, because I wonder what you think about the idea that really what we're talking about is, and this is part of the reason that the peace deal was scotched in March and April of 22, was that the Americans thought, and they talked all about this openly in
Right. I remember.
the rest. They thought, hey, we're doing great, so let's keep it up. And we're changing our strategy now to using the Ukrainian military to prolong the war to weaken Russia's strategic defeat of the Russians. And so I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought, but I'm going to find it in just 1 second.
Right. Well, look, there's something I want to add in here that
I saw that drone strike and I was like, whoa. And then
right, man.
I know what it was.
Okay.
Wait, it's on the tip of my tongue. I know what it was, sir. It was, okay, so plan A was that the assumption was the Russians were just going to smash the Ukrainian military to pieces, and then we're going to finance an Afghan insurgency style war against them, right? But then, so essentially the war we've been fighting for the last 2 years is plan B, which is a positive plan B, that it's actually like A plus. Oh, well, they didn't completely smash the Ukrainian military. It was able to hold together, and we're able to use it as a real armed force to strategically weaken them, whatever. But then, so my question for you is whether you think that if the Russians get so far in destroying the Ukrainian military, that at that point, or even if, say, Congress gets intransigent and they just don't want to back a full-scale effort as they've been doing so far, that then they just go to plan C, which is plan A again, and go back to just, backing right-wing militia forces, essentially.
I think there's some answer to that. I think there's some answer to that. In the New York Times yesterday, they actually said that some administration officials have told them that they're trying to go to a hold and build strategy, whereby they hold what they got in 2024. So they're not trying to go in any more offensives. They just want to keep the lines where they are, build capacity and build missiles and a bunch of other long-range artillery, et cetera, so that they can try to have negotiations in 2025 from a position of strength. And that is just nonsense, because number one, you may not survive, probably won't survive just trying to hold on to what you got. I mean, can you imagine what they're asking the men and the population of Ukraine to do? We want you to keep dying every day for a year, so that the hope that you can negotiate in 2025 what you can negotiate today. For God's sake, if the objective is to negotiate a settlement, do it now. We've already lost one opportunity, golden opportunity, in March, April of 2022. Now it's like a muddy, bad opportunity. But you wait till 25, you may have to just sign the terms of surrender, because Russia is on a definite buildup. They're increasing the number of their troops. They're increasing the industrial capacity, and it is starting to crank out in all the key things of missiles, drones, artillery, new mechanized pieces, new jets, new helicopters, all the things of war that you need. They're indigenously producing. They don't have to worry about getting loans from anybody else, or whether somebody else has enough to donate like Ukraine does right now. And they have 5 times the manpower pool from which to draw. So even if the casualties were equal, and they're not, they're still weighted heavily in Russia's favor, because the imbalance in the firepower continues to tilt in Russia's favor, because Ukraine's running out of the ammunition. So there is no basis to hope that by 2025 they'll get a better deal than they have today.
Yeah, it's such a tragedy. I think one of the real problems in our society, right, is the population still refuses to accept the level of cynicism, to believe in the level of cynicism of our leaders. And these people are completely crazy. They're completely out of their minds. And at the very least, they, as the old adage goes, power doesn't corrupt, but it makes you stupid. And they just get married to, our position, what we all claim to believe is what's going on here, and base their policy on that in a way that just regular people, I think, presume that, no, look, they must know. Like as they said in the W. Bush years, he must have
Must
secret
know.
information we don't know about to justify why they're doing this, because none of this makes sense.
Okay, Scott,
And we,
unfortunately, let me interrupt you right there because unfortunately, I almost don't even want to play this Knicks clip because it kind of really says out loud maybe what some people actually are thinking in Washington.
Virtually all of the security assistance that we've provided to Ukraine and the security assistance that would be that's in this supplemental budget request, that gets invested right here in the United States. That's where it's spent. And that not only helps procure the weapons that Ukraine needs, it provides good jobs here in the United States. It builds our own defense industrial base. So in many ways, this is a win-win for us.
War's a win-win, man. We're making lots of money on this deal. And did you catch the first part of that? He said the majority of the money that we've given to Ukraine has stayed here. It's not even going to help them. It's going to help us financially. He said that out loud. I just couldn't believe that I actually heard that clip.
well, look, I mean, this is how Democrats think economics works. They don't know anything, right? I'm reminded of John McCain, who in his 70s said, "Oh, I don't really know anything about economics, but I'm reading Alan Greenspan's book." And this is right during the crash that Alan Greenspan caused, right? Says the most powerful guy in Washington, right? None of these people know anything. So on the basic level, this is just simple opportunity cost. All that money that's going to these defense firms
Yes.
is money that could
Great
be
point.
going to something else, and not necessarily, as a Democrat would say, could be directed by government toward whatever public schools or more welfare or whatever their pet project is. It could stay in the pockets of the people who work and earn it in the first place,
Yeah.
and
Or
could
not
be
add to the national debt.
that's right. It could be added to capital stock investment in the country to produce goods and services
Great
to
point.
provide for a standard of living for people. Instead, what is he talking about? He's talking about taking all this money and transforming it into $1 million bombs and missiles that they drop on property to destroy. And there's nothing left at all. People are killed. Property is destroyed. It's a net loss for all of humanity. But you're supposed to just invest in Northrop or Lockheed and celebrate that you get to reach your hand in the stream of blood money and take a little bit of it on its way out as it's bankrupting the entire country. National debt's $30 trillion. When every bit of income tax you pay in your entire life just goes to pay interest on the debt to some sovereign bondholder, some foreign nation, some other place. The money that you could have spent improving your own life and the life of your family. I mean, it's completely crazy.
And you
The
know
path
that
they have us
Gary-
on, and that they would,
Yeah.
Danny, that they would say, that military industrial complex that Ike Eisenhower warned us about? Why, that's the best part of America. That's the best reason to have a war. Corruption. See, we're making money for our clients. That's
Win-win,
the
man.
American way.
That's that picture that Gary just popped up there. That was from last week when Zelensky was in town, and this really was stark to me. He was in the United States to try to get to convince Congress to pass funding so that he can defend his country against a war of aggression that's going on against him. And this picture looks like the class picture or something from the high school or whatever. Everyone's smiling. They're all buddies because every one of those people are senior leaders of defense contracting firms. So they're smiling ear to ear, just like what Blinken just said. The war's a win-win, man. They couldn't be happier. And no one's hiding any of this. It's right out in the front.
Yeah, I like how the way Gary put that picture up. It looks like they have the same picture of Ron Paul hanging on their wall that I do. Isn't that great? Good old Dr. Paul.
Yeah, and it's one thing if it's like, nice people getting together, they just had a party. I don't know, a little whatever, friends at college or something. But the people who are funding war are so happy that you're going to get money so that the American economy grows. I mean, he's not even talking about this is going to provide the means for Ukraine to right the wrong that was done to them by Russia, because no matter what, Putin did invade their country. So that's a legit issue. And if I was in my country, I'd want to win too. But when the fundamentals show there is no chance to do this, and to continue to ignore that is to get more of your people killed and more of your land lost.
Yeah.
And then the United States, who can't not know with this. Scott, I can't be the only smart guy in Washington. They've got to all know what I'm talking about. You mentioned that Milley actually called this out almost a year ago, what was going on here. But for them to then say, yeah, and we're just going to keep shoveling money in, even though we know it can't win, because it's a win for us financially. That's
Right.
immoral, I think.
It is. It's completely insane. And the fact that they say it out loud, that they resort to it, it again goes to show the level of cynicism here. And the libertarians have a thing they call public choice theory, which basically says there's no such thing as the national interest. I mean, you and me and the guys at the diner, we might sit around and think about what's good for America or not, but the people in power don't. They think about what's good for them.
Yeah.
And so you have, Politico is probably, like the Washington Post is extremely close to the Biden White House, right? They speak for the Biden White House and gets, scoops hand delivered to them, very close to them. And they say things like, look, Biden knows he has to keep this war going through the election. He's got an election coming up and he doesn't have a peace deal on favorable terms in the offing. So he's got to keep the war going so that we don't change horses in midstream and all that crap. And then they run these articles that say, before the current pitch that you just heard, that while the administration is talking about, they're considering their new PR program is going to be to pitch the military industrial complex and to tell people with a straight face that this is for the profit interest. This is military Keynesianism to build the American economy and all of this, because they can't think of any other excuses. And so what you're seeing there is Blinken, putting out these very rehearsed and I guess focus grouped talking points that this is the best excuse that we can come up with. And then it's all a premeditated thing. They explain it right there in Politico. What's going on here? This is what's good for Antony Blinken. This is what's good for Joe Biden. And this is what's good for Northrop and Lockheed and Boeing. And the people of the world be damned. Again, we got thermonuclear bombs in the thousands hanging over our heads here on the Russian and American side. And as we know, as history shows, and I know you know better than I do, that a war like this or any war could spiral right out of control based on some really damn bad luck or who knows what.
Or just poor decisions. Yeah. Miscalculations,
the Middle
errors,
East,
mistakes. Yeah.
Yeah. And I thought about this the other day when Putin was in the Middle East. What if he had some engine trouble on the way home? And what are they going to do? You could you lose Houston, right? Over a misunderstanding. It's just insane.
Yeah. Yeah. And all those things. I actually, my current big fear is a black swan event for 2024, something that nobody can imagine, that nobody wants, but that something unexpected happens, whether it's an accident or something else that causes all this chain reaction of other things, because things are so volatile right now. It wouldn't take much. I don't know if it's like a Archduke Ferdinand assassination or something like that, but because that one, if you know much about the background behind the start of World War I, the tensions were extraordinarily great among many of the great powers. So that one otherwise minor issue, because there was lots of assassinations at that time of the world, that one caused this big thing to happen. And I fear something like that could happen in 24 if we don't start ratcheting things down into some sanity to give us room to negotiate it or maneuver if that happens.
Yep, absolutely agree. It's an extremely dangerous time and unnecessarily, right? It doesn't have to be this way at all.
Yeah, it doesn't. And unfortunately, this is not going to slow down anytime soon until somebody does something that can knock some sense into those guys up front or something else, because right now it's all working out the way they want it to, no matter what has been happening. But we're going to leave it there for right now, because otherwise we can keep going on for another hour or so. And we always love to have you on the show, because you bring a lot of humanity and just common sense into the conversation, and just calling things out for what they were. We always appreciate that. And then look forward to having you back on a future episode. And Merry Christmas to you and your family if we don't see you again before then. And I hope you have a nice holiday.
Thank you so much, Colonel. Appreciate it.
You bet. And we will see you next time on Deep Dive. We will always remain unintimidated and uncompromised to give you the information you need and the truth, no matter what it is. Remember to like and subscribe and share this to your friend, especially in this season of giving, so that they also have access to the truth and to good interviews like this, to where the complicated issues are sometimes made more simple. We love it. We look forward to seeing you next time on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.